Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Charles Sabanz. I want to welcome you guys to another episode of the Dreamerspro Show, where we cover everything from sports, hot topics, classic debates, entertainment, and when we give you guys a fresh perspective on things and how we see them. And today we got a pretty interesting show for you guys. But before we get into it, please make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let me get into this topic here. This is a very interesting one because it has to do with the sports media landscape, and it's something I'm fascinated by. First of all, a few months ago, or maybe over a year ago, people that didn't like our content try to minimize us to, oh, well, these guys are a reaction channel. All they talk about is what other people talk about, which I thought was pretty much news. That's pretty much how the news works. You're constantly reacting to what things people do and things people say. In politics and sports, that's what I thought. But since they couldn't outright say you're trash, they say, okay, he's not trash, but you're using some kind of crutch to get to grow your channel. It's always some type of trick. It's not that you work hard and you dedicate yourself to year. No. That can't be it. It's a trick. They tried that. They said it's always a trick, right? And the irony is now that we see bigger names that are corporate sports media now coming into the independent space, what you now see is various people going back and forth talking about each other. What am I discussing? What am I referring to? I'm referring to Stephen A. Smith and Dan Le Batard. As you guys know, Stephen A. Smith is currently employed at ESPN, but he has his own podcast. And then you have Dan Le Batard, who used to be at ESPN, and has his own show, and I think he's partnered with DraftKings, if I'm not mistaken. I think they inked about a $50 million deal last time I checked. Last time I read upon their the deal that they signed, right? So Dan Le Batard, now being in the independent space, quote unquote, he's been critical of some of the things that have been taking place within the sports world. He's not proud of the way things have been going. He doesn't like the fact that sports media is essentially degenerating into one big WWE wrestling match. And a few months ago, he had Stephen A. Smith on his show. Yes, Stephen A. Smith went on his show. And while they were talking, Dan Le Batard said to Stephen A. Smith's face, he said, I don't like what you and Skip Bayless have done to the sports media landscape. I feel like you guys are making things worse. To be fair to Stephen A. Smith, the moment he said that, he immediately pushed back on him on his show. Ever since that discussion that these two gentlemen had, they've been having back and forths in the media. So what happened yesterday, when I was wrapping up from work, I came across a live that was being published on Stephen A. Smith's channel, where it was him and Dan Le Batard actually airing out their grievances to one another. And I was like, okay, this is interesting, but I didn't get a chance to watch it in its entirety. So this morning when I woke up, I decided to go through it to see what they were discussing. And it was a very, very interesting, nuanced debate. But Dan Le Batard did not back up from his original position, which is he feels like Stephen A. Smith's, the Skip Baylesses of the world, are the guys that are making sports media worse. And when he had an opportunity to talk to Stephen A. Smith face to face, he did not back down. But before we even get into that conversation, this video is brought to you by a brand new sponsor, Factor Meals, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. If you're like me or anybody that works at Dreamerspro, chances are you're a very, very busy person, especially during the lunchtime when you don't have time to go to the grocery store, pick out fresh ingredients, and come back home and cook healthy, delicious meals. Sometimes we're so busy that you just end up finding yourself making a ham sandwich or something like that, which isn't really ideal. And this is the reason why we are excited to be partnering with Factor Meals. Factor Meals is America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. You can choose from up to 35 gourmet meals. Every meal is packed with premium ingredients, crafted by Factor Meals' team of culinary experts and designed by dietitians to ensure that every meal is packed with premium science-backed nutritional quality. Your meals are delivered directly to your door, and all you need to do is heat them up in just under 2 minutes. Then they are ready for you to eat and enjoy. So for example, this week, I think I'm gonna go with the Italian herb chicken. What I love is that under every single meal, you can see if it's a calorie conscious option. For example, this meal I just chose is the dietitian approved calorie smart meal, which is around 550 calories or less per serving, and also a protein plus meal with 30 grams of protein or more per serving. So if you want to give it a try, click the link in the description below or head over to factormeals.com/dreamers50 and use code dreamers50 to get 50% off. And remember, when you try Factor Meals by using the link in the description below, remember that you're supporting this channel. Thank you. So what we want to do is get into the exchange between these two gentlemen. I think it's quite nuanced. So I want you guys to pay attention to some of the points that they brought up, and then we're going to come back and continue on with the show. Take a listen to that there.
The floor is yours, Dan Le Batard. Talk to me about what's been on your mind and as it pertains to this industry, to people like myself and Skip and the folks we have spawned. What's the whole issue with you, Dan Le Batard, as it pertains to this industry right now?
Let me start by saying, Stephen A., because it feels like there have been some instances where you have felt insulted, and I don't get to decide what's insulting for you, but I mean no insult, because I want your audience to know as we get started here, it doesn't just merely go back to the parking lot and the Spectrum 30 years ago that I know you. My admiration for you runs deep, not just because you're the hardest worker in the business, because you stay hungry, you're a conqueror, but I know what you had to slither around and climb over to get where it is that you've gotten. So I wanted to clearly talk to you in a nuanced way about this entire discussion that didn't make it seem like I was beefing with your credentials or insulted by your existence, because we have decided with Argument Television, which took the acid that was sports radio and put lighter fluid all over it and created an environment that I believe is crueler to the athlete than it needs to be and celebrates sports less than it should, because when you have an argument between two people, somebody's got to take the other side. And very often things that I think should be triumphs end up being about who's to blame, because we got to find someone to blame, and it stops being about the celebration of sports. Skip Bayless, I believe, to be the avatar in our industry, the hood ornament for why athletes don't like the media. I think that he is the face of that, and what has happened after that, because it gets ratings, because morning television feeds it, because the audience enjoys it, what happens after that, I believe, is the athlete becomes slightly less human when it becomes not about winning the games, but about winning an argument.
Well, guess what? I get where you're coming from, Dan, but what I would make the argument, and I don't really take offense, honestly speaking, to when you give that kind of description. What I take offense to is you acting as if it started with the Skip Bayless or it started with First Take. All right, Dan Le Batard was on Sports Reporters, and before you were on Sports Reporters, you saw others on Sports Reporters. What were they doing? PTI has been around for over 20 years. We've seen Mike Wilbon, who we both love dearly, okay, along with Tony Kornheiser. I mean, listen, they were elite columnists for the Washington Post that were never shy about expressing themselves, and they certainly didn't come across as doing that on television. You know, Jim Rome, he existed for years and what have you. And obviously you were writing columns, and before that you were a reporter. You were a reporter and a columnist for the Miami Herald for 26 years, for crying out loud. 1990 to 2016, if I remember correctly. I'm just saying, this notion that all of a sudden Skip Bayless arrived, or Stephen A. and Skip Bayless arrived on First Take, and look at what it spawned. I'm saying to myself, long before we came along, there was y'all, and y'all expressed yourself. I mean, how did you give yourself a pass in all of that, Dan Le Batard?
Well, depending on your perspective, you either made all of that better or you made it worse, because sports writers came up, and I, like you, learned at the knee of some of these people. I came up doing it the way it was done, because if you were on Sports Reporters, that's how they were doing it. I was no one to come in and change the paradigm. And after many years of doing it that way, Stephen A., and some of your criticism that I thought was invalid of me made it feel like you hadn't actually watched Highly Questionable, because if I had one argument with Bomani Jones on that show, it would be too many. I don't remember any arguments. I decided at the beginning of that that's not what I wanted to do with either my radio show, my podcast, or the television show. But I had to learn it. I had to see it all around me on ESPN in order to say, I don't want to do that anymore. But it's fair criticism to call me out on the perception of hypocrisy when you're saying, well, you did it too, because I did. I fed at the trough that ate all newspaper sports department credibilities. ESPN bought all the watchdogs, put us on television, fed us a bunch of cotton candy, money, fame, and it distorted what was supposed to be journalism, because now we've got too many professional wrestling elements in what it is that we're doing.
So you heard the discussion there. Here's what I think Dan is saying, and I could be wrong. This is just my interpretation. I feel like Dan Le Batard is saying, before sports was about having a conversation, but nowadays it's all about debating for the sake of debating. Give you guys an example of what I mean. If you think of ESPN First Take, there have been segments when they've had various people on the show. JJ Redick, for example, may say, I believe this, and he'll make a valid point. But for argument's sake, and because it's a debate show, Stephen A. Smith may say, I'm not saying what you're saying is wrong, but let me tell you why I feel differently. There must always be this disagreement that must take place. And because of that, things may seem contrived because we're predisposed to disagreeing with one another. And I believe he feels like this is toxic for sports media because he believes that the athletes ultimately become collateral damage because they're the ones being discussed. And if this is the way we're going to approach sports, it means that we will say any and everything about a particular athlete or a particular sporting event to ensure that we disagree, even if it's asinine and it's ass backwards. I think that's what he's saying. I'll give you guys another example. Most of us that watch, let's say the NBA, there's certain things that we can view and all agree that it makes sense. And there's certain things we can say, okay, wait a minute, you're reaching. I'll give you guys an example. There have been many times in the past where people, for example, listen to Nick Wright, believe that Nick Wright is trolling because there will be a clear position to take. Maybe Chris Broussard, maybe Wiles will take that position. And then Nick Wright will come up with some obscure, obtuse counter argument just to disagree. And sometimes it gets so bad that people accuse him of trolling and grifting. Where like, you don't really believe what you're saying, but you're just saying that just to be disagreeable. And that is a problem. I think the other thing that Dan Le Batard is worried about is the fact that sports media is turning into one big shouting match. To me, sports is something that elicits emotion from people. You're going to get into spirited debates when you're talking about sports, when you're comparing various athletes. It usually happens, right? Whether it's between your friends, whether it's between at the barbershop, whatever the case may be. You can be arguing Messi, Ronaldo, LeBron, Jordan, this guy, that guy. Is bound to happen. And I think that passion should be should be an element of sports discussion, sports dialogue. But I think once you now start crossing the boundary and getting into disrespect and name calling is when you lose people. I'm talking about flagrant disrespect, and I've seen that happen. We've all seen it. And Dan is saying that this is a byproduct of what Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith are doing. It's his view. I'm not saying that he's 100% correct. I'm just trying to explain his position to you guys and also explain it to myself to make it make sense to me. In the case of Stephen A. Smith is just essentially saying, but bro, this is what we all do. This is what you've been doing. And he'll pull up clips of him having a disagreement with this person or this caller. And Dan is like, yes, maybe I've had these type of disagreements, but it's not the essence of what I do. And to be fair to Dan, there have been some segments on ESPN where it has gone way overboard. Whether if it's JJ Redick going to Stephen A. Smith or it's Kendrick Perkins and these guys, there have been some segments where they go way over. Same thing at Undisputed with Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp, where they've gone way beyond crossing the line, and they keep going. Where some of us were like, this is an uncomfortable moment to watch. Now the hooligans are gonna love it. Like, yo, man, I like to see when dudes is going. But at a certain point, people get turned off by it, right? And I think that's what he's talking about. Will it change? I don't know. Because the sports media landscape it seems to be in such flux right now. Things are changing so rapidly that I don't know what direction it's going to go into. I really don't. I don't know if the debate format is going out of style. But if you look at what's happening on Undisputed today, you can see that it's a lot more tempered. It's no longer these outrageous shouting matches, banging on the table, insulting each other. Those days seem to be gone. And I think that maybe this is the shift that's taking place that Dan Le Batard is hoping for. I could be wrong, but that's just what I think. So what I want to know from you guys is, what do you think about Dan Le Batard's position? What do you think about Stephen A's position? And which position do you agree with? Whatever you guys think, leave your thoughts in the comments, and we catch you on the next show. Peace.